A really happy Friday. Welcome back to the Pink and Channels. The international break is almost over. Norwich City do return to action tomorrow afternoon at Carrow Road against West Bromwich Albion. Of course, joined by my colleague Connor Southwell for your preview show. We'll look ahead to this game and everything else around Norwich City that's happened in the last couple of weeks. Of course, we want your comments, your questions, your score predictions. Get them all down below and we'll work through those later on in the show. Connor, first and foremost, how you found the break? Obviously, it was a tough run for Norwich. Prior to that, just 1 win in 8. And I think we've all been a little bit tired and a little bit frustrated and a bit leggy probably. So how have you found the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, good afternoon, Adam. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, I'm as is well known, documented. I'm not the biggest fan of international breaks generally. I tend to miss sort of domestic football when it goes, and I think that probably is the same for all of us. I don't think we really are eagerly anticipating. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there are some people out there. I don't certainly speak for everyone. I can only speak for me. But I personally am not relishing England playing Albania and Latvia in two World Cup qualifiers that they're expected to win, and watch them play against two low blocks for 90 minutes. It's not really my cup of tea if I'm being honest. That being said, this one did, as you quite rightly say, feel needed. Has felt relatively enjoyable. Has felt quite peaceful as well. And like you say, I think there probably was a fair bit of fatigue towards the end of that run of games where Norwich have largely the feeling has been frustration and an annoyance probably at maybe how close they've got to results and how well they've played in parts, and maybe the lack of points that they've been able to extract from those. So yeah, I think it was a good time probably for everyone just to take stock, to calm down, to look ahead to the final 8 games. I think we're all pretty clear now that it's going to be another season in the Championship for Norwich. So I guess it depends how you want to, the prism of which you want to look through to these final games in. But sometimes that freedom can really open up a team, and it can create some good performances and some good results. So let's hope that's the case. And yeah, intrigued, I think, probably by what the remaining games of the season will look like, and maybe just how close Norwich can get to that top 6 picture, which is probably now going to be the case, rather than whether or not they can get in it, because I think that ship has all but sailed, if not definitely has sailed.
Yeah, I'd agree. Of course, slightly boosted, I think, after the positive team news, I'd say, overall, yesterday at the press conference that Johannes delivered. Angus Gunner going to be back between the sticks tomorrow afternoon, which, of course, is massive boost given their issues in that goalkeeping department over recent times. Jurasek, they feel like he'll be in the matchday squad, obviously been building on his fitness a little bit after what was an injury for a couple of games, and then sort of not being selected due to just trying to build him up to that intensity and those certain levels that's required to play in the Championship. Liam Gibbs obviously had a really frustrating season back in training, probably not going to be involved for a few weeks. Want to try and get some under 21 minutes, but of course huge for him, and mentally I'd imagine a huge boost as well given his problems this season. Mahovo not going to be available on Saturday, but looks like maybe going to be back in training next week, hopefully the start of the week, potentially the back end of the week. So overall, Connor, the picture feels a little bit better, barring any surprises tomorrow afternoon.
And that's the caveat. I'm not one that particularly this season has ever felt particularly encouraged by any sort of fitness bulletin or return, because you always fear that there's a nasty surprise waiting around the corner, and you maybe fear that's going to be the case heading into tomorrow. But let's keep our fingers crossed and hope that it isn't. Like you say, lots of positives in. There's a shame about Lucien Mahovo, I think, because after the Ben Krizene news, I think they potentially could have done with him at left back and his athleticism and whatnot. I've said here I'm not I'm not most averse to Callum Doyle playing as a left back. I think there's been some good bits of him playing there, particularly in games at Carrow Road where they've had a lot of the ball. The issue has come probably in transition. We saw that a little bit at Bristol City where he jumped too early or too late, and was bypassed, and then probably lacked the athleticism and mobility really to get back and affect things defensively. So it does require you to build up slightly differently. And that game, which was Stoke, I think, where Norwich had Fisher on the right and Mahovo on the left, and they could get them really high and be really aggressive with them, get the two sort of wingers into more inverted positions around the 9. That worked really well. They don't quite have that ability to do that same sort of setup now, and it's sort of story of the season really. They find something that works, that clicks, and either the key characters within that get injured or are suddenly unavailable, or someone else is, and it forces them to be a bit stretched elsewhere. So that's life, and hopefully he'll be back soon. But yeah, I mean it's clearly a really good thing to have Angus Gunn back. It's clearly really good to have, hopefully, Matej Jurasek back, and Liam Gibbs as well. It's been a really frustrating year for him. I know he will have been so disappointed, because I remember speaking to him after the opening training day, I think it was, after in the summer, Adam, I don't know if you remember that, where the sun was basking down, and he was really optimistic and hopeful, and feeling like he hadn't probably shown Norwich City fans everything that he'd wanted to so far as part of his Norwich career. And to be honest, that probably still remains the case. Injuries have sort of punctuated his spell too much, and you're right, you've got to balance this between obviously getting him in a position where, because clearly now it's not a fitness issue. They are hopefully trying to safeguard him and future-proof him against any future issues that could come by strengthening his body a little bit. And I think that's probably the right way to go after what's been a really frustrating couple of seasons to him, after that really good breakthrough one that we saw when he won Young Player of the Year and all of that stuff. So a good bulletin, but again, as we said, it's that you just always fear that there's a nasty surprise, someone with a custard pie waiting around the corner to splat you in the face. And I always fear that that's going to be the case.
Yeah, you mentioned the defence there and maybe some of the positives they had in that Stoke game and Stoke performance. But obviously we've seen a few of the negative sides of that probably in more recent weeks, some of the mistakes and the failures to shut down sort of danger at different points, and maybe not giving up a load of chances, but every chance they seem to give up, they seem to concede from. So Tarp yesterday said, over this break, they've worked individually, collectively on sort of how they address that situation. So what sort of, I suppose, do you want to see from that defence over the next sort of 8 games? Do you expect him to maybe revert to a back three? Do you see any potential opportunities to change that kind of element, or players' availability? Do you see McConville sort of getting more opportunities? How do you kind of approach that defensive side over the next couple of games?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, because and it's always, you have to take these things in context, like you say, and I know because I've seen all of the various debate that's happened on social media this week, that not everyone likes the numbers or using the numbers, but if you read them, and I think they are useful in context, they are not a side that gives teams either a lot of chances or a lot of high quality chances. On the flip side of that's too simplistic to say, well, they're all right defensively and everything's sound, because our eyes have told us that's not the case. The goals conceded column tells us that's not the case. There is something lacking, and there is a ruthlessness and edge that probably is lacking from their defensive play, that and probably the top end of the pitch as well, to be fair. That means that they are it's proving costly. Clearly, there's been a season of goalkeeper underperformance as well across all of those that have played in between the sticks. I think that's obvious. So that kind of leaves you scratching your head a bit about what can they fix, because I'm not sure, we're not talking about, as we were in the first half of last season, really major structural issues where they were getting carved open. I don't think they are. And I don't think they are giving teams opportunities that you're scratching your head and thinking, goodness me, how are they consistently giving those away? It's twofold, really. It's individual errors, and it's quality, isn't it, in key moments. That's what we're talking about, moments of ruthlessness, and what I would like to see, I think, is probably a clarity in their defending. I think they probably do need to go back to basics a little bit, and maybe that involves, without getting all old school about it, that probably means that defend first, worry about playing second, and that's probably the foundations that we need to see. And it's interesting because I know there's been maybe a lot of revisionism around Farke's first year, but if you think about the issues that team had, their issue was the top end of the pitch. They were pretty solid defensively, all told. They were quite dull at points, actually, because they played a free at the back. They made life difficult, and they didn't really get a lot of the top end of the pitch that wasn't revolved around James Maddison. This year, it's kind of been the opposite of that, where they've had a lot of the top end of the pitch. They've looked really good in moments there, but at the other end of the pitch has proven costly. So that sort of, I guess, feeds into this idea that they're not a million miles away, but clearly they are when the stats are as they are, and they've conceded the 7th most goals in the Championship, more than Derby, who are in the bottom 3. Those stats are not sustainable for a team that wants to make progress. So more clarity I want to see, more quality, and just more ruthlessness. I think those are the 3 things that I'm really looking at, and that's as a collective. When we focus about defenses, we speak about Shane Duffy and Callum Doyle and Jose Cordoba, but I think it's bigger than that. It's a team issue. You look at Bristol City. For me, the issue wasn't the defence; it was the midfield and how they got the press wrong and how they didn't step up and how they were set up structurally. It then took a change to alter that, and they did get the dynamic. So it's a wider issue and clearly a bigger issue, and probably one that, to be honest, is going to need to be solved in the summer externally with recruitment and with, probably a little bit of a reboot, I think, rather than probably looking at the personnel. I don't see this being an issue that gets fixed in the final 8 games of the season. But like you say, you've got to start seeing green shoots, and that's got to be back to basics. Defend first, play second for me.
Yeah, indeed. Only Plymouth have less clean sheets than Norwich this season, so it's pretty clear where their issues lie. There is a few people asking questions sort of around maybe individual defenders or options. Oscar saying, what do you think the plan is for Doyle? Who is likely to fill his place after this season? And Rob saying, afternoon, boys, if there's no hope of Doyle being here next season, surely it's time to move on from him and work on a different centre-back pairing. Maybe McConville and Cordoba, I suppose, are probably the two you can say with a bit more certainty will be here next season. There's probably still question marks around even Shane Duffy's future moving forward. So in terms of Doyle, Connor, and maybe who Norwich opt to play in those two defensive central areas, where would you kind of be fearing, I suppose, between now and the end of the season?
I struggle with this. And we get it a lot, I think, in seasons and with clubs that find themselves where Norwich are, which is in mid-table, and suddenly people want to play a load of young players and risk things. And it's a difficult predicament, because if you do that and you don't win games and you're Johannes Torup, it doesn't help your cause, does it? I don't think so. There is a balance to this, and as I've said previously, where does it start and where does it stop? Callum Doyle probably won't be here this season. That's a fact, but Josh Sargent probably won't be. Borja Sainz won't be. So do you strip them out of your team, and then Norwich are a considerably worse team for the final 8 games of the season? And equally, you go back to 2017. You could go back to any of the Premier League seasons. Well, let's take James Maddison out. Let's take Emi Buendia out for the final however many games. It's just not the way the game works. Norwich need to play the best players. They need to try and get points. They need to try and win games and finish as high as they can, because what's important, I think, is creating an optimism and an atmosphere around the place. I think the idea that you just sack everything off and bin all the players who are going to go. I mean, again, what do you start playing George Long for the final 8 games because Angus Gunn might not be here? Do you not play Emi Marcondes? Do you not play Jakob Sorensen? I think it's you can get yourself in a bit of a spin with that. I think play the players that are here at this moment in time and deal with what happens in the summer. Then I don't think it's a moment for that. Of course, there's a flip side to that, and there is an argument for handing players more minutes, and I think that's probably where I am on it. I think, yeah, we need to see more of McConville. We need to see more of seeing that Forson and whatnot. And of course, that's a natural byproduct. But I don't think we're suddenly going to see 4 or 5 changes every week because Johannes Torup wants to give a load of players a load of minutes now, because ultimately that's what pre-season is for. And we're not there yet. And there is an obligation that Norwich City put out the best team that they have available, in my opinion. So I think it'll be Duffy, and I think it'll be Cordoba for the rest of the season. I think in terms of that centre-back partnership. Doyle's an interesting one. Clearly, he'll come into the left back thinking as well. Who knows? Maybe if there is a decision to be made there, then I think at this stage, given the options, we'd probably be looking at either a back 3, which could work, or but I think a back 3 would be much more suited to a Mahovo as a wing back rather than perhaps the options that they have at the moment. So I'm not necessarily there. I don't think. And if not, then you're looking at Fisher probably moving across to left back and Jack Stacey slotting in at right back. That's probably where we're at really with it. So for all of those reasons, I think I probably don't think we'll see Rory McConville suddenly get a massive increase and an influx of Championship minutes between now and the end of the season. I spoke to him earlier this week. He's on a very clear plan and path, and he's more than happy with that. People will be able to watch and listen to that interview. 5 o'clock, I think, is coming out on our channels, and you can read it probably a bit of it today and a bit of it tomorrow. But he's not someone that is saying, right, I need to play now. I think there is an acceptance of where he's at and what the plan is. So I really don't see nor think it's particularly helpful at this stage to suddenly say, let's just sack off the final 8 games and play a load of young players because they'll be here next season. Because we could have said that last season about certain individuals, and they're not here now, and the expectation was they would be. So you just can't predict and plan like that, I think. And who knows, you get unknown injuries and suddenly things can be forced anyway. So yeah, let's see how it unfolds. But I would be absolutely gobsmacked if Johannes Torup took us down that route with the final 8 games.
Yeah, while we're on the sort of conversation of future and players maybe being here or not being here, obviously Josh Sargent was doing a little bit of talking over while he was on US duty about maybe where he sees himself and his future and his family and all these various tangibles that are in play. Obviously, Johannes Torp was asked about it yesterday at his press conference. Just going to play that clip now, and we'll talk a little bit about him and maybe where his future lies.
Yeah, I think there were some quotes from Josh Sargent earlier this week. He said that he probably would have a bit of a decision to make this summer. I wanted to ask you how that sort of affects things for you, because I know you're looking at the broader picture and the long term. Is it something that you just have to forget about for now, or does it come into your thinking?
Yeah, but we forget about it for now, because but I think honestly, I know that every player will think about their situation when the season is over, whether it's just Sargent or whether it's a player who hasn't played that much, or whether it's a player who's in and out of the team or whatever. I think everyone will do that. That's natural in football. So I think it's fair, and I think, of course, end of the season for him as well. He needs to see if he should consider a next step in his career. That next step could easily be here as well. So I didn't see anything in that quote that said I 100% have to leave. So I think it's fair to understand that players will often and always have those thoughts when it's end of a season or in the middle of the season, because that's simply how they have to do it.
Yeah, not the easiest international break for Josh Sargent. I know he hit the post and had a goal ruled out as well for an offside in the build-up in the first game. Didn't get on at all in the second game. So I'd imagine he'll be chomping at the bit come West Brom on Saturday to try and get back amongst the goals and prove his worth ahead of obviously the next international camp. But in terms of his future and Norwich City, Connor, I mean, what did you make of his quotes and then Johannes Torp's quotes about where maybe he can expect to be playing his football next season?
Yeah, I'm with Johannes here. Maybe I'm getting old and I'm hardened to the football industry, and maybe hardened a little bit after what happened. But I didn't think Josh Sargent said or did a lot that was wrong there. He will have options in the summer. That's a fact. He's given Norwich 3.5 years. He's developed. He's a significantly better striker now than he was when he joined, and I'd be absolutely gobsmacked if he was a Norwich City player next season. And I think in truth, there's a lot of people inside Norwich City that would say and feel the same. He didn't say, I want to go, I need to go, I need to progress my career. I think he could have said those things. He didn't. But equally, he's asked the question, he answered the question. I don't think there's anything particularly controversial about that. Now, of course, we could say that, is that wise with 8 games to go? Does it play well with a fan base? No, of course it doesn't, because all of the fan base want Josh Sargent to stay. That's obvious. But equally, I think there comes a point where you have to be realistic about it. And he is currently above where Norwich City are, and he's above where the Championship is, really. And we've seen enough of him this season to say that. And actually, I think for Norwich as well, and I wrote a little bit about this in the international break, sometimes there are good moments to sell players, and there are good moments in terms of maximising their value. You look at Ben Godfrey, dare I mention his name these days, and the value they got for him, Jamal Lewis, and the value they got for him, Emi Buendia, and the value they got for him, Max Aarons, Andrew Bamadelli. None of those players have gone on to recoup that value or even play really consistently. So sometimes and maybe this is a point maybe with Borja Science, I think there does come a moment where actually you have to maximize your value and you have to be good at selling players, and that is a key part of where Norwich City are at. And we talk about Brighton and Brentford. That's one element, particularly of Brighton's model, that they've done fantastically well over recent seasons, and it's one that I think Ben Napper wants to do here. And he did that last summer. He got I think extraordinary value for Adam Ida. I think they got really good value for Gabriel Sara, north of £20 million. Abu Kamara, that could be a £5 million package. I mean, Jonathan Rowe, 14 million, considering what he's gone on to do this season, which is very little. I think that's a remarkable sum of money as well. So you do have to accept that at points the players are going to outgrow, but I don't think that's necessarily a negative thing. You can grow and sell players. And again, to use the 17-18 campaign, Norwich lost their top 3 scorers, Maddison, Murphy, Oliveira. They brought in someone called Temu Pukki, someone called Emi Buendia, and they did all right. So, of course, there, as we said on the pod, there is so much that goes into that melting pot. But just because you sell players, it doesn't mean that you're doomed to failure. Brentford, a good example as well. 7 years in the Championship, sold Ben Rama, sold other key players, Ollie Watkins, Rico Henry, sold all of the sorry, not Rico Henry, but they sold other players who were in that period, and they really improved actually because their recruitment was good. So if Norwich City can get their recruitment in a place where it's positive and it's productive, then these sales don't need to be major news. And of course, obviously, you'd hope that Anti-Cianats could step up as well. But yeah, I found it a little bit of not a non-story, but certainly the reaction I found a little bit strange, because I don't think he necessarily said anything that most of us wouldn't expect him to say anyway, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I think it all blends itself to Adam's point here on YouTube. Napa pretty good at extracting max value, which is good. Obviously, spending it, the jury is out. We're yet to see, obviously, the full potential of some of these players that were, arrived last summer. We're starting to see maybe the fruits of Cianats starting to step up, but obviously there's still a long way to go, and we'll see what we get. We'll see a lot more questions around recruitment coming through as well. We will touch on that very shortly. Jacob Wright's a player I also wanted to ask you a little bit about, Connor, because he captained England's under-20s during the international break, and a player who's, I certainly felt sort of prior to the Bristol game, was starting to really show his worth in those couple of home games, and that sort of intensity and the ability he has on the ball, and obviously a very culturally good footballer come through the school at Man City. He's obviously going to have those sort of technical skills and in his sort of back locker. There's obviously been a few reports that, Preston are maybe sniffing around, and obviously we know a lot of other clubs that were interested in January, the likes of Derby and Swansea. So where do you see his future? Is that one that you think Norwich are going to wrap up? Obviously there's the option in the deal to do that. So is he one that you can imagine being part of the sort of project and the plan moving forward?
Yeah, I think so. And I think I'd like to see that one converted as well. I think he's certainly one that I look at. We think, and we're in a stage in the summer where Kenny McLean's going to be in the last 12 months of his deal. There's a natural succession plan there for me, and I've been really impressed with Jacob Wright when he's played. I think he had it was a tough introduction for him, wasn't it? Being thrown in at the deep end against Preston, and I thought we struggled for that game and the opening 15 minutes against Hull. But since then, really, I think he's shown that he's a clever footballer, an intelligent footballer, but also he's in the mould of what Johannes Hoftorp wants. And I think, given his pedigree, his potential, I think they'd be really silly at the fee that it is. What is it, about 2.8, I think, plus add-ons, 2.3 maybe with add-ons. It's that's extraordinary value for a player of his age and his quality. Will there be other interest? Yeah, of course there will be. It would be silly if there wasn't, but Norwich will clearly have first dibs on that because of the agreement they've got with Manchester City. That's not to say that it's a formality, though. Jacob Wright could decide actually that, having spent 6 months here, he doesn't quite like what he's seen, doesn't feel he's been involved enough. There's maybe other options, more money elsewhere, so he could turn that down and then obviously go elsewhere. It's not an absolute guarantee. So I'd like to see him here. I want to see more of him. He's one of those players and young players, and there's a few I think in this Norwich group. I recognise sort of the comment above about spending the jury being out, and that's absolutely fair. But I think there are a lot of players that I'm sort of sat thinking I want to see more of. Oscar Schwartau, Jacob Wright's definitely one of them. Cordoba is another one of them. I put Lucien Mahovo in that bracket. Clearly was signed last summer, but not as a kind of first team option. So I think there's a lot of those type of players, and he's definitely one of those. And you just think in a 46 game season with a full pre-season under his belt, if he could get that at Norwich City, then I think he could be quite an exciting addition. I don't think he's ever going to be a player that chips in with loads of goals and assists, but I think as a facilitator for what Johannes Hoftorp wants to do and how he wants to play, I think he could be a really integral part, not just for next season, but the seasons beyond that as well. Good profile. Probably like to see a bit more athleticism into him, a bit more physicality, but certainly that technical foundation is excellent. And that is what, for me, Johannes Hoftorp is trying to do here. He's trying to build, and Ben Napa, they're trying to build a base of young players with a really high technical ceiling. You think Callum Doyle is an example of that. Anti-Cianats, Kellen Fisher, and what he's done. I think Jacob Wright is another. And that for me, I think of Jacob Wright, if he's exposed to a lot of championship games between now and this time next year, think about where he could be, and that's the same for a lot of Norwich City players. So yeah, I'd like to see that one converted. I guess we're probably in a similar boat to that with Lewis Dobbin, I would say, who maybe that won't be a permanent, maybe that will be a case of another season-long loan, but I'd definitely like to see probably them to return to Norwich City next season.
Yeah, I'd agree with you on that. We'll dip into a few of these comments before we maybe talk a little bit more about West Brom and the game on Saturday. We've got a question on YouTube saying, when do you expect the released and retained list to be confirmed by the club? Obviously, they usually tend to sort of produce that, I suppose, prior to the final games of the season, and particularly given, I suppose, they've got a few sort of longer-term servants of the football club, the likes of Hernandez, Gunn, Sorensen, and amongst that, you'd imagine that will come before the final game at home to Cardiff?
That's certainly been the protocol. Yeah, I mean, we could probably ask the question and try and find out for a bit more clarity. But yeah, given the final day is against Cardiff, and probably we're not expecting any sort of involvement after that, I would expect it. Yeah, probably in the week leading up to Cardiff.
Yeah, Rob, with another question surrounding Callum Doyle. If, and a big if, the club had the money in the summer, would you go and buy Doyle and build the team around him, or would you invest the money elsewhere? I suppose, obviously, the fact, there's potential that Sargent and Borja signs and Nunez could all depart. There's obviously money going to be available, you'd imagine. Obviously, also got the backing of Mark and his group now. So, Callum Doyle, potentially, obviously, dependent on the fee, would that be one you'd want to see return, Connor?
Oh, yes, I think so. But that is clearly a major part of it. The fee, I think he's an exceptional Championship player. I think I would have issues, and look, don't really need to worry about it now because Norwich City aren't there, and I think the Premier League stuff needs to be probably put on the back burner for everybody until we're in a position that all becomes relevant. But certainly at this level, yes, I think at a Premier League level, I would have concerns about his athleticism, obviously his lack of pace, but his quality on the ball, the way that Norwich want to play. There's a reason that they pushed so hard in last summer to sign him, why they presented his camp and Manchester City with really detailed plans, why they got him down at Colney, all of those elements, because they felt he could play a major role. He has, I think, this season, probably not really recaptured the form that he showed at the start of the season, I would say, but I think we've seen enough to see his quality, particularly technically. His ability to sort of break lines, to progress Norwich up the pitch in terms of their possession. I probably expect them to be less lateral next season in terms of how they keep the ball around the back. You need players like that. But yeah, it's an interesting one because with Cordoba there, I'm not really sure that they would want to basically sign two players of a very similar age group that they invested in Cordoba. I think you'd want to see year two him really kick on. So it's a tough one. I think if I could, I would, but I think we're probably not going to be in the realm of reality. But I'll boil that back to you, Adam. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm probably with you in terms of the fee would be a determining factor. Maybe, if it can kind of be in and around and sort of below the 8 million mark, sort of roughly, which, given his kind of wealth of Championship experience now, still a young man, obviously Man City are probably going to be demanding a relatively big fee. But the fact he's never played sort of any Premier League football, hopefully might potentially go in Norwich's favour. And I just sort of maybe feel his form's dipped a little bit in the second half of the year. So maybe that kind of, if you'd have sort of gone back to August, September time, I'd have feared that there was absolutely no chance. There probably is a little bit more of a door open maybe than it would have been the case had it been pre-Christmas. But yeah, I think I'm with you marginally as well that, I don't want to be blocking pathways for, the likes of, obviously you're going to have the likes of Brad Hills hopefully back in amongst it come the sort of summer. And, Cordoba, obviously, as you mentioned, McConville, it feels like that's kind of an area where they've got plenty of players, maybe a slightly more experienced pro, I'd feel, maybe not quite up to sort of Duffy's age category, maybe someone just below sort of the 27, 28 mark would be kind of where my veering would slightly go towards.
Yeah, and I would add, I think if they don't sign Doyle, and I'm with you, I think if basically the max I would go to is probably the Cianats money, probably. I think, and I probably would expect it to be north of that, really, but especially given they were, I think, looking for sort of 15 last summer for him. So that would probably be similar after another season, if not slightly reduced. I still think it would be north of 10, but that's me guessing rather than having any sort of knowledge on that. But if they don't, as I would expect, really at this stage, if he doesn't come back, I think they will need another left-sided option because, you mentioned McConville and Hills and Duffy. Those are all right-sided options. So I think they probably will have to do a left-sided one, whether that's a younger one who maybe can knock on the door behind Cordoba, whether that is, as you say, maybe towards the more experienced end. I think there's probably arguments and cases and points to make for both of those at different ends of the spectrum. I suspect they probably favour going young, given the overall strategy. But yeah, I think they probably would need another left centre-back because you look at how it's shaping up. There's very clearly two right-backs there, Fisher and Stacey. I think there will be, at the end of pre-season, I think probably two right-sided centre-backs, two of Duffy, Hills, McConville, and then one you would say probably either goes or goes out on loan. Really only Cordoba is the only left-sided centre-back at this moment in time. Then you've got your two left-backs with Mahovo and Crizene. So you're probably one short, I think, in terms of a centre-back. So that would probably be how I assess it at the moment. And who knows, maybe they'd look to do another sort of dual one, a centre-back that can play at left-back or whatever, because that would make a lot of sense, I think, as well.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions sort of around the recruitment more widely. Dan Mayhew saying, where do you see the recruitment going? I see a midfielder, defenders and a goalkeeper. Maybe some more in that 22 to 25 bracket with some more experience. Obviously also a recommendation there. We'll bow down to you in terms of the Dutch league, Dan. You know, plenty more about players in that league than what we do. Jeffman also sort of questioned a little bit around recruitment. Off to get my lunch. Of course, it will be a sausage roll. Wouldn't surprise anything else but from you, Jeffman. But that, watch the rest back later. But how many signings do you think we need, and how many do you actually think we will make in the summer? Obviously, probably a little bit fluid depending on who departs the football club and maybe which players come back from loans and impress. But in terms of kind of the recruitment and where the, I suppose, main priorities will be in the summer, Connor, where do you kind of see that?
Yeah, well, I've got sort of the age groupings above me at the in front of me at the moment. Sorry, so you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 players who are older than 25, essentially in that squad at this moment in time. That probably feels light, I would say. And between 24 and 28, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 players, but one of them is Dan Barden, who, you know, is what, third, fourth choice goalkeeper. So we're probably looking at a slightly fewer than that. I would like to see more in that age group. I mean, I put that to Ben Napper directly in the interview. He felt that Norwich's balance is good, that it's right, it's where they want it to be. I think considering when you look at, obviously, of that group, Sorensen is out of contract. We're probably expecting Sargent to go, Nunez potentially to go, Sainz potentially to go. Marcondes is obviously out of contract. Gunn is out of contract. Hernandez is out of contract. There's a lot of players in that sort of category of age profile who are out of contract or, you know, likely to be attracting interest from elsewhere. So I think they will inevitably have to do business in that age profile. I would still expect it to be relatively aligned with what we saw last summer strategy wise in terms of young players on longer term deals, because another part of this is that group that they signed last summer. Jose Cordoba will be entering that category. I think his birthday's in June. He'll be 24 by the time the next season kicks off. Antti Sienats will be a year older next season, obviously, as well. You've got Emanuel Forsen, who will be 23 in December. Dobbin will be 23 in January if he sticks around. Jurasek will be 22 by the time the season, sort of next season begins just afterwards. So there's a cohort of players there that will naturally grow into that group, and I think that's the hope, that you have a base and of players that kind of grow with you. I guess similar to kind of what Arsenal did, if you think, and clearly there's a link here because Napper will have been inspired by that. You look at what Edu did at Arsenal when Arteta first went in, and they bought a lot of players who were quite young and maybe didn't have that pedigree, and it's not resulted in Premier Leagues, but I think we would all agree that Arsenal team is significantly better now than it was at the start. And a lot of the baseline of those players are ones that they bought in year 1 or year 2 that have grown and developed into that team and into that core of Arteta's squad. I think it will be very similar at Norwich, where they buy young and hope that the likes of Sienats, Cordoba, Jurasek, all of those players can kind of develop and move into that stage where they become established players within that Norwich system. Which again is probably another reason why, you know, sort of the hope is it won't be another transitional season, because you've got a lot more players there who have been recruited to play in Torup style, who hopefully will be a lot more advanced in that. In terms of sort of overhaul more generally, I'd expect it to be a busy summer again. I think there'll be lots of ins, lots of outs, and I think the squad will continue to be refined and shaped. So I don't think it'll be quite as busy as last summer, is what I will say, but I think it will be busy. I mean, they're probably going to need a striker. They're probably going to need a left winger. I think midfield is interesting in terms of both what they do and profile of player. I still think they're short of a 6, but I think if they sign Jacob Wright permanently, I'm not sure they would do that, because they'd have McLean and Wright to fulfill that role. I'd probably like to see probably a bit more of a dynamic number 8. Increasingly in my mind, I think they need a bit more creativity in that midfield. We've spoken about it before, but they've only really got Marcondes of that cohort that can do maybe what you'd want them to do in terms of link the play. And I think he has faded a little bit in recent weeks, if I'm being honest. And you know, potentially again, an Oscar Schwartau can step into that role and take that on. But I think I'd like to see another added there. And then obviously we've spoken about left-sided centre-back, and they're going to need a goalkeeper as well. So we've identified probably 5-6 positions there that they're going to need. So yeah, it feels like it's going to be a busy one, on top of, like you say, any unwelcome surprises, which hopefully will be at a minimum compared to last season.
Indeed, yeah. Any sort of comments, questions? We'll be live for another 10 or 15 minutes, so get them down below. We'll work around to those very shortly. But just turning back to the game and what's ahead for Norwich City. Obviously, West Brom make the visit to Carrow Road tomorrow afternoon. 2-2 draw in the reverse game at the Hawthorns. West Brom very much the draw specialist of the Championship, got 18 already this season. Obviously, had the change of manager since the last time we played them. Carlos Corberán obviously departing to Valencia and managing Max Aarons over there now. And I know he's not getting a lot of minutes, but Corberán, I think, very highly regarded in the Championship. They've obviously veered down a slightly more experienced route in Tony Mowbray, who, of course, is great to see him back in management after some tough spells out with various illness issues. So, what have you made of them, Connor, so far this season? Obviously, come into this game sixth in the league. Sorry, probably looking to try and push towards those playoff places between now and the end of the season. So, do you think they've got enough, I suppose, in the tank to sort of, I suppose, get that position come the end of the campaign?
Yeah, an interesting side, haven't they, all year, really? Corberán, of course, is and we know this, brilliant at this level, particularly at organising teams defensively. Tony Mowbray's a little bit different. I think as a continuity-wise, he's done okay. They're clearly in and around it. Really good defensive record. Probably haven't scored enough. You look at where they are in terms of the stats and whatnot. They're pretty middling, aren't they, for creating, but certainly defensively they're up there. I think you're probably looking at 4 or 5 teams that concede fewer chances than them this season. It sort of surprised me a little bit. I looked earlier and they haven't won any of their last 11 on the road, which is a remarkable stat. And they've actually drawn 10 of their 19 away games this season. They've won 4. So if I was a betting man, I'd be looking at the odds for a draw tomorrow and seeing if they're well worth it. But that's probably been their downfall this year. They've drawn too many games, and that probably speaks to what we spoke about, really, in terms of them being a team that don't really create enough but don't give anything away. And if that is the case, then you will draw a lot of the games because the margins in which you play are so slight. Of course, that was a similar narrative to what was the case going back to their place in, what was it, November time, wasn't it, where I think they hadn't conceded at home, or had conceded a very limited number of goals on the road. Norwich scored twice. So that's not to say it can't be broken, and clearly the quality that Norwich have from an individual attacking perspective, you would hope that they create chances. And the beauty of this game is I think it will be more open than what we've seen at Carrow Road in recent games against Oxford and Sheffield Wednesday and Derby and Preston, where they've had to sort of unpick a lot of low blocks. I don't think it will be quite as much of that. I think West Brom clearly will need to win the game. We'll see this as a game they want to win with 8 to go to sort of establish themselves. And in that sense, you just think it might cough up a bit more space to Sargent, Sainz and others to attack into. And that's where Norwich have been at their best this year, where they've almost been sort of transitional. So, I think it's going to be a bit more of an open game. West Brom are an interesting team. I've got a feeling they might just fall short in terms of the playoffs. Just because of that sort of struggle from an attack. And I say struggle relatively, they've not been dreadful, but I don't think they've created enough for a team to get in. That doesn't mean they won't. And Mowbray traditionally, and you look at his Sunderland team and his Blackburn team, they were always quite offensive and quite good to watch and whatnot. So we'll see what we get tomorrow. But I'm really intrigued by the type of game it is, and I think it will be probably a bit more of a watchable game than the ones we've had at Carrow Road in recent times.
Yeah, I think West Brom got a big period coming up. I think the next 5, they play the likes of Coventry and Bristol City and obviously Norwich and various other teams that are kind of in and around them, Watford maybe as well. So clearly going to be a big period for them. I think Josh Madger is going to be back in a couple of weeks as well, who obviously was at one point sort of chasing Bois-Sainz for the top goal scorer, being injured for the last couple of months. And maybe the likes of Adam Armstrong, who they brought in January, just hasn't quite managed to sort of hit those levels. I think 2 goals since his arrival. So pretty clear that they've kind of got a big period ahead, and they probably need to pick up some points in those games against teams in and around them to try and sort of stay the whole chase between now and the end of the season for the top 6 race. Before we dip into a few more of these comments, Connor, just intrigued to kind of get your take on maybe the last 8 games and the approach from the team, I suppose, to try and keep the fans on board, because it was a question that Torp was asked yesterday, and obviously we saw it a little bit with sort of the latter stages of Farke's first season, that 5-1 drubbing at Sheffield Wednesday. They knew they were going to lose James Maddison, and maybe the mood was a bit bleak, and obviously then they struggled at the start of the next campaign. So how big is it in the next 8 games at Norwich, particularly I suppose in these 4 home games, really put on a show and keep these home fans on board?
It is to an extent, I think, by and large. Would it be useful and helpful? Yeah, I think it would be in terms of sort of framing the summer. But they ended the 17-18. I haven't got it in front of me, so maybe that's one for you to look up now, Adam. But they remember that they finished that so poorly. I think it was like 3 wins in 16 or something like that, and there were major questions, of course, being asked at Daniel Farke then, but it didn't necessarily affect 18-19 too much. So I think there is always a risk that you maybe look into these periods a little bit too much. I suspect we'll get to about 3-4 games out, and people will just want the season to be done and over with, and probably some of the players and staff will as well. Of course, if you can end it positively, that's great. You think about the optimism and energy that would then take into the summer, rather than the flip of that, which is maybe they go on as they have been. I suspect what we'll actually get is probably what we've had all season, which is inconsistency. They'll win a couple, they'll lose a couple, and then they'll draw a couple, and they'll finish probably mid-table. That's my expectation, because that's what this team has been. I don't suddenly see a flick of the switch and then winning 5 from 8. It could happen. Because I think there've been times where they've threatened to do that this season, and if they get a good run of injuries again, I'll repeat the stat. I think Bristol City was the first time this has happened, but they've not started a game with McLean, Nunez, Sargent and Sargent since October. So if they can have 8 games where they can do that, then there's a possibility that they can win a fair few of these final 8. Will it change anything? No, because I think there'll still be that sense of disappointment that they haven't got into the top 6 from some. And some people will be as well conscious that it's a project. So I think you can look at it how you want to look at it, through whatever lens suits whatever your feeling is, to be completely honest. I think what is necessary is that they don't suddenly go and throw the towel in, and they're on the beach and they lose 6 of 8 or whatever. That wouldn't be healthy. But they just need to win enough, I think, and get to the end of the season now, is probably my view on it. I think sometimes these things can get overblown somewhat, and suddenly it's like, well, they've got to win loads of games to get the fans on side. But actually, if you could say now that to every Norwich fan, you're going to lose 4 of the last 8, but you'll win the first 5 of next season, no one cares about the end of this season. So yeah, these things can get blown out of proportion, I think, a little bit. Is it useful? Yes. Is it necessary? No. Norwich aren't going to change their head coach. They're not going to deviate from their strategy between now and the start of next season. So yeah, that's maybe my view. Bit boring, I know, but that's probably my view. What about you, Adam?
Yeah, you're right in terms of that 17-18. It was 3 wins in 16, but a couple of good home wins, I think, and good performances at the end of that season. Aston Villa at home particularly sticks out when they were sort of challenging in the upper echelons of the table. Leeds obviously was Wes Hoolahan's final hurrah, and obviously he got the goal and everything that came with that. But yeah, for me, I think it's just the performances. I want to see good performances between now and the end of the season. Maybe less so the results. I mean, I think you kind of look back at the Bristol game. Okay, they weren't great for a period within that game, but they had enough opportunities. On another day, they probably go on and at least get something, if not even win that game, if they don't, give up the silly opportunities at the back. And even the Wednesday game, the first 45 minutes, they were miles ahead in terms of the way they were playing, the movements, the goals they scored, the chances they were creating, and then obviously the same problems that have really been an issue all season came back to haunt them. So I think it's probably, for me, not so much the results, but the performances. If they're positive, and maybe some of these players that are going to be involved next season, Force and Cordoba, etc., come to the party and start to show their worth, then I think there's enough there for me to go into this summer feeling in a better place maybe than if they sort of go off the back of these next games and they lose a few, but they play poorly, because then I think there's more concern to the summer and what lays ahead. Just a couple of questions before I get your prediction on Forson. Paulie Walnut saying, where do you see Forson fitting into the team next year? He hasn't nailed down a position. Obviously had injury problems throughout this season and still having to adapt to a new country and various new playing systems, new sort of, various issues that, probably been new to a relatively young man. But in terms of him, what maybe do you need to see from him between now and the next 8 games, sort of moving into next year?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think he's certainly one that could slot into kind of that creative void that maybe we're talking about. I mean, you think about him early on in the season, that pass for Sargent against Sheffield United, and there have been flashes of creativity in there. I think he's shooting from range. Clearly, we saw that against Coventry, but he hit the post against Brighton. There was one in the West Brom game, actually, in the reverse fixture of this, that stands out in my mind. So he's got that in his locker as well. So I don't think it will take a lot for him to sort of lift off, so to speak. And it's one of my sort of disappointments this season, that after the heroics of Coventry, we didn't get sort of a run where he could then take that momentum. It hasn't really felt like he's had any this season, and that's true probably of quite a few of the players and new recruits. Cordoba another, Sienat's another. They've been a little bit stop-start this season, and their minutes have been sort of in and out of the team and in and off the bench and that sort of thing. And it's difficult to gain momentum like that. So there's always an opportunity, providing they can find a role for him. What I do think is, if they persist with sort of the inverted wingers, I think it gives you an option to maybe get a midfielder a little bit closer to the 9 as well. If that happens, I think that would suit Forson and, probably put less pressure on his possession, where, they were playing him a little bit deeper this season. He was giving the ball away and they were really costly concessions. Whereas if you're getting it, which is why I think they subsequently moved him out to the left, he was giving the ball then away in areas that weren't as dramatic and weren't as costly. So, again, a good pre-season under his belt, establishing a role, experimenting a few things. I think there definitely is a role for him. And, I've seen enough to suggest that he is capable, certainly technically. It's then about whether he can withstand sort of the physical challenges of the Championship and whatnot. And, hopefully over the summer he can spend that working on those aspects of the game, and we can see a little bit more from him, because, you don't play Champions League football at any level if you're not a half decent player. So there is a decent player in there. It's just similarly with Schwartau and others, it's about finding his role and his moment probably to step into that team. And that could be next season, could be never at all. We shall see. And I think that's probably an exciting aspect for this season. And all I would say, just to link back to our previous conversation about the end of this season as well, is Norwich have got a pretty tricky run. You look at who they've got. Obviously, West Brom tomorrow in and around the top 6. They've got Sunderland to come to Carrow Road. Still got to go to Burnley. Got to go to Middlesbrough. That's a tough. Millwall away is never easy at any time in any context in the Championship. So, Cardiff on the final day could be facing relegation. Could be involved in the relegation battle. They could come to Carrow Road needing to win. None of these games are easy. So yeah, it's I think maybe a little bit short-sighted to expect suddenly Norwich to flick a switch and win loads of games. I think they'll probably exist as they have been, and it would be good though. I think if we're talking about individuals, it would be good to see the likes of Forson, Schwartau, Sienats, Cordoba, those players who could potentially force their way into the core of the team next season, to really step up with a few quality performances between now and the end of the season. That would be good.
That would be good indeed. Fiona, Angus Gunn is back for tomorrow's game against West Brom, so that's obviously positive. Dan said, for me, as long as we see positive trends and showing good sides from the younger, newer players to head into the new season, then obviously be happy. And that 17-18 season with the 5-1 drubbing at Wednesday, Maddison going off injured, was far from ideal. Hopefully we don't get that against Cardiff at Carrow Road on the final day. I think that probably brings it to score prediction time. Connor, how do you see this game unfolding? Obviously, you mentioned, maybe seeing a more open game and two teams that will want to probably keep the ball on the ground and play football a little bit more than some of the other teams we've seen in recent weeks. But only 1 win in 7 against West Brom recently, so Norwich maybe not had as much joy as they maybe have down the track years ago. Yeah,
it always used to be that Norwich did very badly against Wolves and quite well against West Brom home and away. So yeah, that recent record sort of scuffles that a little bit. That being said, I don't think Carrow Road's been the happiest hunting ground for West Brom over the years, and these things shouldn't mean anything, but often they do. I don't know if it's the sunshine. I've got a funny feeling Norwich are going to win tomorrow, 2-1, something like that, and I think they might look quite good doing it as well. And then probably lose to Plymouth. That's probably the way it'll go, won't it? And that would be in many ways a really good microcosm of this season. So yeah, I'm going to back Norwich. I think it'll be the type of game that suits them. Good opponent, and actually in terms of the end of the season, those are the type of results that would really breed some optimism if they could, and also frustration as well. But if they could beat West Brom and over two games this season take 4 points against a team that could finish in the top 6, I don't think you could really grumble with that. So yeah, I've got a funny feeling Norwich might edge it. What about you, Adam?
Yeah, I think this break's probably done plenty of players and maybe a lot of the fans, probably the world of good, just having a bit of a break and a bit of time out after a difficult run. And I think they'll probably want to go and put on a show and put things right and get a result in front of the home crowd. So I'm with you. I think they might actually go and get a win tomorrow afternoon. Probably go for a 3-1 Norwich win. So we have a slightly different level of couple of predictions. I think their attacking players will come to the forefront. I mentioned obviously Sargent probably wanted to try and maybe put his few issues from the international break behind him and try and grab a goal or two. And I think maybe the defensive side of the game, hopefully they've worked on that and they can keep it out a little bit and keep that back door shut to only concede 1 and maybe not the 3 that we saw against Sheffield Wednesday in 12 minutes, whatever it was. So we'll see what we get, of course, on Saturday afternoon against West Brom at Carrow Road. Of course, we'll be there, Team News Live from 2 p.m. The last 3 p.m. kickoff on a Saturday at Carrow Road this season. Obviously, there is Portsmouth, but that's on Good Friday, so not a Saturday 3 p.m. So hopefully Norwich City can put on a show in in the sunshine. Hopefully the weather will be good tomorrow afternoon. Of course, I've got plenty of other good content already on our channel and coming your way. We've got the press conference from yesterday. We've got Tactics Board. We've got Terrace Talk, a little bit more insight on West Brom. We've had interviews with Mark Tierney. We had the Milk Cup stuff with Asa Hartford and Mark Barham. We've had so much good stuff, and there's some more good stuff coming your way later today as well. Obviously, Connor did hint at it. He did speak to Rory McConville earlier this week, so we've got a 20-minute chat, sort of some interesting stuff on how he's settling into Norwich, maybe why he moved away from Brighton, a bit around his international career to date. So that's definitely worth checking out when that drops later on this afternoon. And obviously, we've got all the written stuff as well. You can take out a Pink and Plus subscription. We've got, Ewan Roberts' column. We've got Chris Sutton. We've got Chris Gorham. We've got all the main Norwich City hitters that you want to be reading from. So we'll see what we get tomorrow afternoon. Late prediction from Danny's going for a 2-2 draw, and we will be 2-0 up. So, yeah, fingers crossed that doesn't end up being the case. Of course, we'll see you tomorrow afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your Friday. Enjoy your weekend. And hopefully Norwich City can get back to winning ways tomorrow afternoon.